Especially here, especially in the United States, you hear people always saying what they're saying would be ideal for them actually would rise to the level of being an intentional community, but they don't have the terminology and they don't have the awareness and they don't have the understanding. So it's preventing a lot of people from realizing a sort of lifestyle that they would like to have. So that's why we do need to have the awareness of what they are and how diverse they are and who would fit in which community. So is most people gonna go into this new lifestyle? No. A few will, and we need to spread the awareness to make these sorts of arrangements palatable to the people who are looking for them, who don't know what but they don't know what they're actually looking for.
Probably looking for their soul family, right, and spiritual.
Yeah, their tribe can manage to just spend their life within four walls for years and have very little social interaction and just work. The vast majority of people will not thrive in that sort of environment. So I agree, although I personally don't feel put off by the demands on me to be a part of this new modern lifestyle. I fully understand the depression, the suicide, the anomie, just not feeling a part of anything and just saying, okay, my whole life is apparently work. I work and I sleep and that's my life. I have kids, but I send them to daycare and ignore them when they come home and then I sleep. And it's a very unfulfilling lifestyle for most people. Oh yes, we do need alternatives, whether or not it's, Bruderhof or something like that. We do need alternatives for the vast majority of people because the way that we're living now is not sustainable for most people.
It has made it very, what do you call it, confronting as well. Because of our isolation, living in a community is actually incredibly scary. If I really give the idea serious thought, what I think about is, of course, like you are sacrificing a lot of privacy, and your people are going in your worst and your bad states, your worst and your best states. And there's really no hiding from each other, which is something that we have all kind of done for our personal comfort. But it isn't really helping us. And I think that these communities, they force everybody together, and kind of that can be very confronting. I think that is actually a scary element that might also contribute to why people would leave an intentional community after joining, because they just can't take it.
Yes, I've seen that.
Alright, hello everyone, welcome to Common Underground podcast. I'm your host, Jasper Rodenhuis, and today I'm joined by Netrista as well as Tjeerd. And for people that don't know who Netrista is, he was a student of mine from the philosophy classes, and I first gave lessons to your son, Dris, and then later on we talked, and I helped you out with your movie that you're making about your past experiences, and you're an engineer in the US, a emergency. You just corrected me before we hit the podcast saying that it's not an emergency engineer, but what was it?
Escalations engineer.
Escalations engineer. So yeah, like just to start out, like what are your prime interests, and could you give some introduction for people, like how you go, where you're coming from and how you interacted with me with the movie, and like what the reason behind the movie is as well.
Yes, I'll be happy to do so. Like I said, I am an escalation engineer. I primarily operate professionally in the IT space and have done so for many decades. I do have a background in analytical and continental philosophy, which is one of the reasons I had my son work with you. And I do have a significant passion for film, especially sacred drama, and I thought you would be a great person to dialogue with regarding a specific script that I was writing at the time. And you were excellent.
Thank you very much. So today we're going to talk about the intentional communities. So maybe just as a jump off question, what makes you interested in this topic? Do you have past experiences? Are you orientating to join a intentional community? And maybe first start out with what is an intentional community in your viewpoint, on your viewpoint, and how you look at it.
If the question's addressed to me, I do have experience with multiple intentional communities. I think the meaning or the import of intentional community is straightforward, at least in my opinion, that it is always a collective of people who join together to establish a community over a shared goal or philosophy. In my experience, I do have significant knowledge of kibbutz in Israel. I know many people who have lived in various kibbutz or kibbutzes overseas. I do have some awareness, direct awareness of Christian intentional communities, and I was drifting in and out of a community of people who had alternative lifestyles. It was like a polyamorous community.
So yeah,
And personally, I would gravitate towards, for the type of lifestyle that we have here in the United States. It's changed over the decades from sort of like a help your neighbor model, we're all in this together, to people living next door to each other for years, not even know their names, in some cases not even know what they look like. So I would actually like to be a part of a community where people are there to be together, and not just have their home be a space that they sleep in between work shifts.
So it's also very much about the communal lifestyle as well. So besides
Yes.
the intentional community is of course a step extra in that you're really building something together, your own village and communal space, but in a communal lifestyle it can be done everywhere. It's more of a way of living, like or a way of interacting with other people. So for people that aren't familiar with like what polyamorous communities are, maybe you can explain a little bit. And there's also with the polyamorous a certain viewpoint, like on people that criticize it because it's like almost getting a sex cult. Like, how do you respond to those critiques? What are your own experiences? Like, how are things going in that way, like with spirituality and?
Well, being from the United States, it's my impression that most of the country still has more conservative traditional values. I feel that to be true. However, in the centers of the country that I would circulate in, which would primarily be New York or New England, especially Massachusetts, there are more liberal attitudes. And I think that a polyamorous lifestyle is not suitable for most of my countrymen for a variety of reasons, but the people that I have had the pleasure of having experience with had very mature attitudes towards relationships that, due to a variety of factors in our lifestyle here, long-term monogamy is not necessarily a solution for some people, and rather trying to force yourself into a relationship model that doesn't work, to be more mature about it and open yourself up to other possibilities, because people have many loves throughout their lifetime. They can love multiple people at the same time, and if you can handle that without the issues of jealousy and time constraints and whatnot, it is something that some people do choose to explore. I am not aware of any issues in community with like-minded people. I would definitely not describe it in any way, shape, or form as a sex cult. This was very committed, consensual relationships. It wasn't a free-for-all, but people were allowed to explore opportunities, emotional or otherwise, with other people and still maintain their primary partners.
So this would be a common critique, right, of the ideas of intentional living, in that people would maybe describe this as like a hippie commune, if people like the free love and polyamorous relationship.
I would not
They
describe.
seem to go. Oh, it tends to go along with a stereotype, that supposedly all of these taboo things happen. Do you feel like that is a necessary component of an intentional community, or is that optional?
That's very optional. I have never experienced anything that would rise to the description that you have just painted. In my experience with the one particular community, everybody was very well educated. Everyone was professional. Everyone was focused. They were very valuable members of the community, doing great things, raising children. The only difference was somebody may have, I wouldn't say two husbands, but somebody may have a husband and a boyfriend. Or somebody may have, two girlfriends or something like that. Maybe one of the boyfriends from one side might hook up with one of the other person's girlfriends. And it was not a big deal. That's the only difference, is that people did not express ownership over their partners. They realized their partners could have different emotional or other needs met by somebody else in the community, and they did not feel threatened by that. And I would say the main thrust of the community was not sexual in any way. It was just the reality that due to our lifestyles, some relationship models didn't necessarily work, and they wanted to explore other avenues, and that was the extent of it.
It's kind of surprising how it seems to always come down to this conversation, even though in my personal experiences, like of people that choose to live intentionally in these types of communities, it seems like the center focus is generally food safety and independence from like the electrical grid, and kind of having also a spiritual independence to carve your own way forward. And of course, I can see how a small facet of that would be like polyamorous relationships, but I've never really seen the connection there, except in the stereotypical descriptions that try to make it seem like it's a bad idea. Thinking about it and kind of doing some research, I realized that I have come very close to these types of communities, whether they are intentional or unintentional, and I think maybe the focus should be on the word community, and kind of finding out exactly what that means to someone. And that doesn't mean group sex. That means so much more. So, what do you think are like aspects of community that are the most important when you're trying to set up one?
Well, I'm glad you jumped in there, because I actually live right next to an intentional community, and I forgot about that. And that is very different from the other three communities that I had let in with. I would say that the one collective that I am most familiar with was a response primarily to the type of lifestyle that has become so prevalent in our urban centers here in the United States, and that is a lifestyle of complete disconnectedness. Like I said, you drive on the road 2 hours at least every day. You run in your apartment, maybe you eat, maybe you order food, and you go to bed. You have no idea who the neighbors are. If you get yourself into a bind, there's nobody to help. Everybody you know is online, so on and so forth. And your life is out of kilter. It's out of balance. You don't have those people that you can rely on or lean on or commune with in any way, shape, or form. So what people did with this particular collective is they bought a beautiful place. They were out in the woods. They didn't want their children in just random daycares. All the children were pulled together. They were homeschooled by professionals, people with master's degrees and whatnot, and they had a beautiful schoolhouse. They had all sorts of recreational amenities. Some people didn't want to grow their own food, but it was not off the grid, and they had something that they wanted to come home to. They had their intense work life, and then they matched it with an equally fulfilling community that they shared the other half of their lives with. And it was a very beautiful experience, and relationships variances was a very small part of it. Up the street where we live, we have a community that was formed by a religious man, and he has alternative, non-mainstream political and other views. And what he did was he created this group living space where people can have alternative style homes. They can live in this little enclave, and they do share a fundamentalist style of religion. That's an enormous part of their worldview. They are not always in tune with the local, state, federal government. They have their own ideas about how the world should work and how they want to live their lives. They don't want any interference in their life whatsoever. And they do attract a lot of people who are disaffected from the mainstream society, be it conservative all the way up to liberal. The people who gravitate there don't fit anywhere in the standard conception. So, and they make a go of it. It's a little rough over there. They don't all necessarily have standard access to heat, hot water, or electricity, but they do seem to have hung together for decades, and they live the way that they actually want to live. Depending on whose viewpoint it is, some people think that this is a problem having them over there, but I think for their objectives, they are living successfully along the lines that they meant to achieve.
You just mentioned that this particular community was founded by a single individual.
As far as I know, yes.
It's very interesting, like, to think about, like, intentional communities. It might get compared to a cult sometimes. I feel like does that have to in my opinion, like, an intentional community is equity all around. It's coming together in groups to make decisions. If you have an intentional community that is run by a single individual and their views, would that kind of also qualify as a cult in your opinion, or not necessarily?
I'm of two views. Most of the other intentional communities, the Christian one and the other one, I don't want to call it the polyamorous one because that puts too much emphasis on that. The more urban one, they had charters and they were democracies, for the most part. The Christian one, a little bit less democracy, but the two of them had charters, and people pitched in financially to maintain the properties. It was shared resources for food to a certain extent, shared upkeep of the properties. So there was nothing cult-like specifically about that, and it was very much driven by shared objectives. There was no one person saying, you will do this and you will do that and I am in charge and you all answer to me. The other one that's up the street, due to their worldview, which you could call conspiratorial, that would not be an overstatement, they are more secretive in how they operate. I do know that one particular gentleman did have the financial capability to outlay this particular piece of land with alternative housing. I don't know too much about how that community operates. I just know that it's there, and I do see it every day on my driving through the area. My concern was when when I just moved here, I did make the mistake of going in there to look at a car, and there was the concern that I was a liberal, which I am, and I was coming into their community. So they did not, just based on that, they didn't know what my intentions were or why I was there. So I would state that, in my opinion, that's an unusual behavior to see someone new just come into your territory. So there are cultish aspects to it.
Yeah, so you just mentioned that some of these communities are tied to religion. For my example, Broederhof and how you have these communities
Yes.
all around the world. In South Dakota, I know about Hutterite colonies as well, and I think these are farming collectives primarily that are spread out across large groups of spaces. Would you also consider both of these intentional communities?
Very much so. I'm very familiar with Bruderhof and the Hutterites. I don't have direct experience with them, but I had actually researched Bruderhof a couple years ago. I don't think so. My family it's less than obvious, but my family ethnicity is significantly German on one line. So, and they were rural farming people, and the family came here to establish Missouri Synod collectives, like church communities. So when I look at something like Bruderhof, I can immediately orient myself to that. There's nothing that I see unusual or cult-like about it. I do think that, some of their views are a little antiquated. They don't necessarily, the people who gravitate towards they wouldn't integrate well past the point with the mainstream society. But I think that their philosophies are mature, their objectives are clear and understood, and I think that they do they offer a lifestyle that is very valid, very legitimate for people to want to pursue. Does it
explain a little bit about what Bruderhof is? Because I'm not familiar with it, and I think a lot of viewers aren't as well.
I'd probably let Tjeerd do this, but I think that they're very similar.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, you go ahead.
So, from what I understand, so Bruderhof, it's intentional communities that have popped up all over the world with a Christian orientation, and they maintain certain traditions like garments. So they wear very antiquated, perhaps looking clothes. You can compare it to the Amish. I think that's still like people are familiar with that. So they'll have these ways that they have set up the community that are in line with their faith, and similarly they raise their children together in this faith, but allow them the opportunity to also leave after they have reached maturity, to then decide whether they want to in the outer world or return to the Bruderhof. And generally, people actually do tend to return because of the safety, because of the familiarity, and because of a lot of aspects about these communities that are just more suitable to how humans are supposed to live. Like, in my opinion, we're not solitary animals. We're definitely like herd animals, and we need communities to find out who we are ourselves. And these kinds of communities, you see, it was a documentary I watched, which was following teenagers that left this community. And you can imagine, once you're a teenager, you start kind of kicking against all of traditions from your parents, and these children were very unhappy and were excited to go out into the outer world. A lot that happiness wasn't to be found out there, and that basically all of them ended up returning. They couldn't wait to go back, and not necessarily because because of their religious dogmatic views, but because of these ways that the communities are set up, built around faith. It seems like it's kind of the thread that sews an intentional community together if you have a shared spiritual perspective. Now, these are very successful communities. Like, people are starting intentional communities all over the world, but they all seem to fail. Like, a large degree of new ones seem to fail because they are missing probably this ingredient, that the religious-based intentional communities seem to have established very well for themselves. I don't know if I've kind of explained it well, but I think a comparison is kind of
like Christian monks, I guess. It's just like,
it's interesting. It's almost like you would go and visit a Renaissance fair and then realize that all the people there actually choose to live that way all year round, and that's their lifestyle, and they've chosen that. So maybe that's a better comparison.
Well, I would think, like I said, my ancestors emigrated here from Germany, at least a portion of them, they're just living the way that they conceive of people living, let's see, like a couple centuries ago. They're not doing, for the most part, they're not doing anything like never done before in human history. They're going backwards in time to when things are simpler, like the Amish people. And they are also heavily, like, completely focused on religion. So they're bringing us, at least in my opinion, they are reviving a mode of society that had worked in the past. And now the majority of us would look at that and say that is just, that's completely antiquated. They're out of touch with modernity, so on and so forth. But the question is, why do we all have to live the way, we do now in modern society? Works for some people, doesn't work for other people. It's not good or bad. It is just an alternative mode of living that is successful for those people.
Exactly. We have such sky-high numbers of depression and suicide amongst teenagers and young adults. There is just such a growing discontent and unhappiness in society that seems very much connected to falling and falling into these online echo chambers where you don't really get to experience community anymore. You just find people that agree with you and ignore everybody that doesn't. And especially since everybody has been sitting inside of their home for the past 2.5 years, basically at this point. You can really see that if you would live in a community like the ones that we're talking about right now, that your life wouldn't have really changed that drastically. And these people, they are on average much happier, and they even live longer. And if you ask them about their lives, they'll describe it in a way that they just seem more content with life. And I think that there's something to be said about that.
Yes. And it's sad because I just thought my life hasn't changed either, but from the COVID pandemic, but my life consists of me spending several years of my past life sitting in an office, which is kind of sad. But for me, I like it, but I am that kind of person who could do that forever. And I don't think that most people can manage to just spend their life within four walls for years and have very little social interaction and just work. The vast majority of people will not thrive in that sort of environment. So I agree, although I personally don't feel put off by the demands on me to be a part of this new modern lifestyle. I fully understand the depression, the suicide, the anomie, just not feeling a part of anything and just seeing, okay, my whole life is apparently work. I work and I sleep, and that's my life. I have kids, but I send them to daycare and ignore them when they come home, and then I sleep. And it's a very unfulfilling lifestyle for most people. Oh yes, we do need alternatives, whether or not it's, Bruderhof or something like that. We do need alternatives for the vast majority of people, because the way that we're living now is not sustainable for most people.
It has made it very, what do you call it, confronting as well. Because of our isolation, living in a community is actually incredibly scary. If I really give the idea serious thought, what I think about is, of course, like you are sacrificing a lot of privacy, and your people are going to in your worst and your bad states, your worst and your best states. And there's really no hiding from each other, which is something that we have all kind of done for our personal comfort. But it isn't really helping us. And I think that these communities, they force everybody together, and kind of that can be very confronting. I think that is actually a scary element that might also contribute to why people would leave an intentional community after joining, because they just can't take it.
Yes, I've seen that. I have direct experience with that. In the Christian community, that community, which I said a little about, was a Church of Christ community, and I think that there may be multiple sects that are identified as Church of Christ, but this was a church with an international focus that had a very literal interpretation of the Bible, and they had everybody living together in apartments. And the reason that they did that, especially unmarried singles in apartments, because they didn't want their membership to fall prey to the bad influences. So it was going against human nature, especially for people in their 20s. And the participants went into the community with the best of intentions, but little by little they all fell by the wayside because they would see the cute guy or the cute girl, and there was so much pressure that no, you can't be yoked to somebody outside the church. There was no alternative. There was no possibility of fulfilling your urge to be with a certain person, and that almost single-handedly wiped out a significant number of their membership. Is that it was not a sustainable model because the community was focused on a thou shalt not do that kind of philosophy, because it's ungodly, and everyone had the lofty goal that they were going to live up to the standards set by the church, but they could not do it because at the end of the day they were still humans. So that was my experience with that.
I can certainly imagine that would be a big obstacle and sacrifice that people would have to make in order to live in peace together with others.
Yes.
However, of course, that very much depends on the denomination or the kind of religious inclination of the group that you join. I can imagine if you join some free love community in Costa Rica, for example, that people aren't really going to mind if you bring some lover in from a local village and be like, no, this person is just passing through. However, those might have different aspects where you feel like, yes, but I don't like to see my neighbor do the deed underneath the waterfall that I gotta wash my coffee cups under an hour from now. There's a lot, of course, my imagination is just going wild now, but because I don't have experiences with this. However, I can imagine that, there would be things that you would rub against each other. Constantly you're rubbing against each other.
Yes.
And people, they do hold very different opinions.
Yes, it's different if you're in a homogenous community like a Bruderhof or Amish, especially if you're raised in that community. When you are raised with the worldview of those types of very exclusive groups that are their entire lives are dominated by biblical teachings, you are formed with that worldview, and that is your normal. With something like the Church of Christ that like to recruit from colleges, you're incorporating people from a broad spectrum of experiences and originating worldviews, and you're trying to force them into a collective that is somewhat unnatural. And the people will gravitate at some period in their life toward, they're looking for something more, and religion might offer something more on that day. That might be what you need on that day or that time, you're depressed, whatever. But once you get into it, the best of intentions, you're going to have that baggage from your own past that is going to come in conflict with the way that these very structured, very stringent groups want you to live, and you're not going to be able to do it in most cases. You're not going to change who you are fundamentally. With the polyamorous community, that's the way these people were to begin with. That was their orientation. And again, that wasn't even the thrust of the community per se, but nobody was going against who they were as a person. They just wanted to have a shared, fulfilling lifestyle, and the vagaries of relationships, dynamics and changes and all that stuff didn't really bother anybody. It was just something that was, and everybody could deal with it. I don't know how the community up the street deals with it. I think that community clings together. I think it's intentional, but people cling together because they are misfits, and there's no other avenue to pursue the lifestyle that they want easily.
Why would it be important for people to know about the intentional communities? Why is it such a present topic? I have my own reasons. I've been orientating a lot. I think also like people are looking for stability. They're looking for like a sense of meaning. There's a huge meaning crisis, and people don't really have a sense of belonging somewhere. So they're also in search on like where can I really just be myself and flourish in the type of way that I can, and allow people to just respect me and accept me and see me as who I really am, because a lot of people project things onto others. So I think there are so many reasons why a person could be inclined to go to a place like that. But what would you say? Like, why is it important for people to know about intentional communities? Or is there something like, like how can people, and we talked about this last time we spoke offline, but it's like how can we live more in a community base? Like, you have philosophies like Ubuntu, and like in Africa and also South America, there's a much more of a focus on communion. But here it's also it's tied also being socialistic or with communism, like it's also a center of community, but then it's in a different approach. So people are trying to find an answer to all this meaning crisis and something that goes against capitalism and its current system the current paradigm that we're in. How can we live in some valuable manner? Like, we're being taught money is the most valuable thing, time is the most valuable thing, but what is more valuable than that? And how can we go to a place that facilitates that value of those virtues? That's what I've been looking for, at least. How do you see that? Like, how do you see an intentional community being so important, especially in these times that we're in?
Well, I would honestly, I was smiling when you said communism and socialism. I would say that in the United States, those are like the ultimate dirty words, and most people have no. You might as well say you're a Satanist or something like that. But most Satanists are good too, but they have a very different, radically different philosophy that has nothing to do with religion, but they use that term is to be provocative. But it's the there is such limited knowledge for so many people here that extends beyond their immediate experience. People don't really want to get outside whatever their bubbles, their demographic bubble happens to be, what they gravitate towards. So however, we're in a society where you could just go on the internet and just start talking to you in the Netherlands or here in Jamaica, or people all over the world. So we're coming face to face with different people every single day, living in different, just living all these different lifestyles. And in order to engage in dialogue, we have to strip away the misconceptions that we have about people. If they say, oh, I'm in an intentional community, and if that's going to start sparking the fears of, oh, they're communist or socialist or whatever, they're a sex cult, there's no way forward with that. That's just a blocker. That's a conversation stopper. But especially here, especially in the United States, you hear people always saying what they're saying would be ideal for them actually would rise to the level of being an intentional community, but they don't have the terminology, and they don't have the awareness, and they don't have the understanding. So it's preventing a lot of people from realizing a sort of lifestyle that they would like to have. So that's why we do need to have the awareness of what they are and how diverse they are, and who would fit in which community. So is most people going to go into this new lifestyle? No. A few will. And we need to spread the awareness to make these sorts of arrangements palatable to the people who are looking for them, who don't know what but they don't know what they're actually looking for.
Probably looking for their soul family, right? And spiritual.
Yeah, their tribe. Their tribe. People here, a large bunch of us are looking for tribes, and yes, you can actually have a tribe. It would be called an intentional community, but they don't know that. So they're looking for something more ineffable, something that can't really be realized. But a community is something that can be established with the right amount of financial, emotional investment, and it could be a way forward for some people.
I think it has to do with looking for nurturing as well. So, in my opinion, I guess I'm a liberal too, but I'm also conservative. In that, like one of the worst things that's happening to humanity is kind of the dissolvement of the family unit, and so families are incredibly important to make people feel confident about themselves and ambitious about and optimistic about the future, and making them feel like they are loved and taken care of. So since I'm from divorced parents, I can see how that has affected my life compared to people whose parents have stayed together even through trouble, or parents who are just happily together. It is a big difference, but that's something very recent that has started happening, and then of course it's tied to something very beautiful, the emancipation of the woman who is able to actually leave an unhappy marriage. However, it has had a sad concept. A lot of people grow up to divorced parents, and people are now lacking something when they're an adult, and maybe intentional communities are going to become more important in the future because of this reason. People now have the freedom to look for their tribe, and family isn't always going to be the default tribe that is going to be it for you. The people are now looking to go to college out of state to get away from their parents, and you see that there's a generational gap with a lot of very important vital beliefs as well about how the world should be run. And so people are coming, they're like college age kids, they're looking across the Atlantic, and they're like, oh, you see those socialist programs that they have over there, wouldn't that be nice? And then they come home and their parents are like, what did you just say? Socialism? Like, you're gonna kill us all. Oh my God, this generation. And so people, there's a divide that's happening. And of course, like I'm from a socialist country. I can let you know that socialism is horrible and it is great at the same time. But it's not what it's made out to be. Same thing with communism. A lot of people in America that are looking at communism as like only alternative to the failed capitalism seem to think that there is a lot of merit in communism, and there's only very little, because people tend to forget that millions were murdered and able to enact that little social experiment. And I think that what we need is on a smaller scale. Like, look at local governments, look at towns, and see how we can become more independent, not as the individual, but as the community. Great way forward, and a great resistance against globalism. Like, let's not waste fossil fuels importing little plastic things all over the world. That doesn't make any sense. We really don't need that if we're being honest with ourselves. And these kinds of things are going to contribute to the importance of intentional community. So I guess I also want to answer your question with that, Jasper. I think that we need to, intentional communities are vitally important, even though I couldn't picture myself living in any of the ones that we've described so far. That just means that I have to come up with my own, like me and my wife, for example, we're monogamous, and we're going to always be monogamous, and that's going to be very difficult to even refrain from judging polyamorous kind of community, right?
You could have in a polyamorous community, you could be monogamous too. It's not even.
It is a great spiritual exercise to try and refrain from judgment. And so trying to look at this and just observe, and not trying to cast any judgment is a great tool. And so people should familiarize themselves with these concepts. But withhold casting judgment.
Yes. True.
Definitely.
Do you think? What do you think about that? Yeah.
Casting judgment. Two things. On the casting judgment front, the polyamorous oriented collection of individuals, I wouldn't be the person to comment on that because I was in a triad at the time. So I lean more towards monogamy, but I'm open-minded on that front. But there would be literally nothing there for me to have casted judgment on, given my orientation to relationships and other factors. I just saw another group of people exactly like myself, with the education and the profession, and all mostly mid-career people raising families in a beautiful home, and being able to do so in such a way that the expense of this property was shared. So if somebody lost their job, the property doesn't go by the wayside. They don't lose their home. They did not have to put their children in daycare because you had people working all different shifts and very capable of teaching children mainstream and more liberal education curriculum. So that's a dream of a lot of people, to be able to be home with their kids or have some input into their children's education. I really don't, the focus on being green, everything about that community was remarkable and wonderful, but I have those biases. The kind of issues that I have were more with the Christian one, just looking at the worldview, wondering how are they going to sustain this? This is just not a model that works. This is not a fruitful endeavor. And it wasn't. It was and it wasn't. It was because they always kept their numbers up and they always got interest, but it wasn't because people were drifting away. So and people would never go back to that religion again. So that's more of the type of thing that I question. And
Seems like it's a stagnant type of community that is trying to hold on to everything.
Yeah, exactly. They wanted to control everything, and there was no room for any progression. It was semi-democratic. Everybody agreed on the core principles and foundations, and they voted on this, that, and the other, and they shared this, that, and the other. But if somebody wanted to do something that was outside their rigid norms, then they were literally ousted from the community or they left. So yes, it was stagnant.
It's like also forms of self-expression are stifled, or if a girl wants to wear pants, that's not allowed, or something like that.
Yes, and that's just, I don't know, because I'm an atheist, so I can't even wrap my head around wanting to do that. I'm not against people wanting to do that. If that's what makes you happy, go do it. I'm not going to say anything about that, but I'm just thinking of it from the perspective of having something that's sustainable with your current membership. It doesn't work, and we saw that. So they always had the numbers, but the membership was very fluid, and everybody, little by little, fell away for the most part. The one up the street that's conspiratorial, that one, unfortunately, I do have to struggle with my judgment because their lifestyle is alien to my own. But at the end of the day, I do understand how people, at least in our society, can become that disaffected that they don't trust any level of government. They don't trust the school system. They don't trust their neighbors. They don't trust anybody except people who have their same conspiratorial worldview. And they sacrifice a lot. Their standard of living is very, very low. And bringing children into it and isolating them into this sort of environment, I am personally not comfortable with that. And that's the struggle that I have. I know what I feel is right for my children, and I can be judgmental about the way other people raise their children, but I have to step back and say, well, they could say the same thing about me. I'm the great liberal, socialist-minded, horrible person, probably in their worldview. And that's just the way that we all break out. We all have our own biases, and it's very difficult to see through somebody else's perspective.
Absolutely, but if you put yourself in an echo chamber, like you're describing with this group, for example,
Yes, it
then
is.
you've stifled your philosophical evolution, and you're like, no, these are my opinions. I'm gonna plant my flag here, and nothing is
Yes,
gonna change them. And the more you try
yes,
to convince me, the more I am convinced that I must be right.
yes,
And
yes,
that's very similar, of course, to certain religious groups that that read one book and think they know absolutely everything. And so it could see that for the 21st century and going forward, intentional communities might have to address that that I guess previously very successful element of intentional communities and try to integrate that into into a diversity of opinion and a diversity of morals and values effectively. That seems very tough because we have created very large intentional communities through urbanization, where
yes,
people, like you mentioned, have started ignoring each other to be able to make it work. I remember I did the same actually. I was living in Brooklyn, and if I would step out into the hallway and I would see somebody else that was using the elevator, I would use the staircase.
yes.
No
You're
way I
gonna
would
do
get
that.
into the elevator with them,
Yes,
because let
yes,
alone you might have to smell a stranger. It's like you
yes,
come up to your apartment building and your neighbor cooking, and you're like, this is why is everybody's food smells so gross. You start
mhm,
to really despise people you've never even seen the face of.
yes,
And
exactly.
I've noticed that big cities have that effect on me. I lived in New York twice, and I would find myself getting upset, getting aggressive, and then having to come to myself and be like, "Where's this feeling coming from? I'm just sitting on the subway. Why do I feel like drop kicking somebody in the chest if they look at me the wrong way?" And it's like, wait a second, is that what everybody else around me is feeling? Like, am I picking up these vibes? Is this the city vibes? Um, and that's why, like, Jasper and I, we're from an agricultural place in the Netherlands. It's actually everything is kind of relaxed, very mellow, and probably comparable to big sky country in like Northern America, big open, wide open spaces, and
Yes.
we have intentional communities there as well, and they're based around farming mostly, about food security, and that's really where the independence starts. But as an architecture student myself, I've also come to kind of really respect the demands placed on the design of a community to be able to make it work. Because we're talking about the human element so far, but we're not talking about clean water and dirty water and waste management and power and broadband and how you can actually provide that for everyone. That seems to be a big part of a modern intentional community as well.
Mhm. No, I agree with you 100%. Space. Oh, it's been so long since I researched it, but I did a huge project on the psychological effect of space on people, and that is something that really needs to be understood, and that's going to be your avenue, Tjeerd, because space does impact people deeply, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and I also come from a very remote environment originally, but I'm a city person. So the things that would bother you are the things that I would love. I'd be all up in that. But that is not for anybody, and I can definitely understand your reaction to some of the urban living. But the other thing that you had mentioned that really deserves attention here is the importance of generations under one household or in a community. And Jasper and I had talked about that, I think, last week. I think honestly it wouldn't be the ultimate solution, but I think if we could get back to having four or so generations pooled together, I think that could really mitigate the echo chamber effect, especially with something like COVID. And I can tell you why is I see my family members who did not live, insofar as I know, in a generational context are very suspect of things like vaccinations, and they think they're evil and bad and horrible, and who knows what's in them, and blah blah blah, and they're putting themselves at risk because they only do their, you know, bias confirmation internet searches, and they're in the same echo chamber of other people saying the same thing. But I grew up with multiple generations under one household, and the oldest members would tell us about the entire classrooms of children lost to epidemics, like anything from like the Spanish flu onward, and the wonders and the thankful, like smallpox of the vaccination was like a miracle, and stopped the huge extreme loss that people, my grandparents, great grandparents, experienced last 2 centuries back now. The turn of the 20th century, in the first few decades, and that perspective is lost. It's very different when you're sitting at the knee of somebody who said, you know, all my friends died. They all died from smallpox or the Spanish flu or whatever, and you know, you go to school and everybody was gone. It's hard for us to imagine. We do not have those types of experiences. And, you know, I grew up hearing about how people survived during the Great Depression. If you're going to do something like a more off-grid type of intentional community, having those stories in your head or having access to somebody with that knowledge, which would be very difficult to find now, is critical to the success of the endeavor, because you need these sorts of skills, the sort of mindset, the sort of survival outlook that was prevalent back then. And that knowledge is lost due to our lack of exposure to people of different generations, and quick internet searches and stuff like that is never going to fill that transfer of knowledge gap.
Oh, you're right.
I see a point in that, but I also see a certain flaw, because like you're hitting on something very controversial, like just to put people on to saying that they're in confirmation bias. Like some of the people really have, like myself also, have quite some concerns with side effects, and everybody makes their own judgment on what is healthy for them and what is not. And if you make something like that mandatory, so taking people's choice away to put something inside of your body without informing about the possible risk, that's a huge crime. And I think this also in the future will come out a lot more. But then it's on the point of the generational, which I agree with. But the like I work with elders, so I also work with children, so I'm all very much cross influenced in multiple generations. But for elders, they put on the television, and everything that's on the television is true, because otherwise it undermines the whole philosophy. And so if I just totally accept and assume everything they say, then I will be stuck in that mentality. Yeah, vaccination works, and there's no risk, and it will stop people from getting infected, and all these things that are also confirmation bias as well. So it works on both sides.
Yeah, so yes, that's true. But
now there were, like, the last thing, like there were people that really were severely damaged from vaccination, which, you know, it's a controversial topic, so you know, I cannot talk about these things openly because you get censored, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. But about the community with the cross-generational thing is also very much in South America. Like they also, because they don't really have another choice, so there's a huge influence into multiple generations, and that really helps to see children at more. They learn from elders, as well as the elders get more of an active energy from their children. So you have this interchange that has a positive effect on both ends, and that's, I hope, that will happen a lot more, as well as like people need to take care of their fellow man. Like here you have something called mantelzorger, which means that you're taking care of like an elder that's like your family member. So those things are possible here, but most people just get stuck in the mentality like you need to work a lot. And so all the work that we do is actually specialized work for society, instead of holistic work that's down to our own place, providing our own food, like Tjeerd said, like the food security, but also building your own house with natural building, learning to maintain yourself in all different ways. Instead of all of these specialized people that we pay money for, we actually get responsible for all the tools and things that we interact with. Like some products you cannot really do without specialization, like using this laptop. But our society is so highly focused on specialization that almost nobody really sees the whole picture of what's going on.
True, very true.
And that's also a point on the community as well, which hopefully facilitates that awareness that, okay, somebody just died that knew how to fix the toilet or whatever. So it's tragic that that person died, so it's something very personal, but it's also making you aware that there needs to be somebody else that replaces that skill, that can take over. Instead, like right now, if that would happen, I have no idea like how to replace his work. So that takes me into a mindset that I'm also responsible, not fully, because that person, if they're still living, they'll do it. But if they fall away, then at least I know a little bit about what they're doing. So you need to be more generalist in orientation.
If I can say something to that, I agree with you, Jasper, that, generalization or people that are jack of all trades, that stuff is kind of fading away with hyper specialization. I think we can say that we reached hyper specialization. And another way for me to look at this, which kind of puts it in a different perspective for me, is to look at how society is actually functioning as a fractal. And the specialization is a consequence of time passing, with so many inventions taking place, so much technical and digital evolution. We do need all of these specializations, because my goodness, if Netrista wasn't so good at IT, can you imagine if all those people had to figure that out themselves? Like,
It wouldn't work.
nobody would actually want to do that either. And if my smartphone stops working, I couldn't care less about opening that thing up and trying to fix what's inside there. But somebody's whole life is built around those types of tasks, and that's why we need each other, right? That's why we need community at a large scale as well as a smaller scale. One of the conversations that I've had with my wife, who's a doctor, about intentional communities is like, well, what about medical emergencies? Like, what if you need surgery? If you're going to live in a colony somewhere or in the Broederhof, nobody is going to be able to do surgery on your heart when you need it, staff. And so we are very dependent on each other in society, and we need each other in degrees that we don't fully respect. And so the generalization is important, because we're giving up a lot of our freedoms. We don't make our own food anymore. We don't take care of a lot of aspects of our own lives anymore. We've delegated tasks, and in a sense, we need to. We really need to, because life is just getting bigger like that. And it just also means that we're becoming more and more dependent upon each other, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. We can just use our free will, however, to decide which of the things we don't depend on others on. If that really contributes to our happiness in life, then that should be a focus of ours. And you can see that a lot of people, they've been feeling uncomfortable about giving away control over their food supply, and about how they get to make decisions, anatomy over their own body, like you're saying, is suddenly become very important for people. And yeah, I'm at a loss to see like how we're gonna understand that the intentional community that we really need is at the scale of our planet.
Yeah.
Oh, very true.
Yeah, eventually, sooner than later, right? Things that like we can look at the whole planet as an intentional community that way. I think, I don't know who I'm quoting here, but somebody once said that we should view the Earth as a spaceship, and we're its crew, and we all need to work together. And it is true. Like we might be a planet, but we're moving through space, and we just have each other. We really just have each other on this beautiful planet. And Yeah, in a community, if one person is taking all the resources for themselves, then discontent will grow and eventually conflict will arise. And then the conflict needs to be addressed. And how you address it influences how future conflicts will be addressed. And so we have to start making choices, not just for ourselves, but for others, and do it from a loving and compassionate place, because otherwise we're going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. So, yeah, the importance of intentional communities and kind of studying them, even though you might not be considering joining one, is to kind of learn to perhaps recognize those community elements in your own life, however that might look.
Well, a common what ought to be a common goal of a community?
I would always say like love, right? Love is all. Like a love is all you need. Like the Beatles said, it really is. And so finding ways to love everybody and to love what they're doing, and I guess we can use many words. We can be like, well, I respect what you're doing. I don't understand, and then just tell yourself, no, I love it. I actually love that there is this diversity and that you're doing things that I don't understand. Uh, because the opposite is what happens most now, where we cast judgment on the behavior of people that we don't understand. And we're like, well, I don't know, there's something wrong with you, and it makes us feel good because that must mean that we've got it right. And it's a perpetual cycle this way.
Yeah.
I would strongly agree. I don't know if I'd say love. I would go with a bare minimum of cohesiveness as a goal. Or brotherhood, although the non-gendered version of brotherhood, I don't know what that would be, but the fraternity. So as long as that's your base minimum in respect and wanting to be there and wanting to progress both yourself and your community members, I think that that would be, a realistic foundation for a community. Otherwise, you can just do everything yourself.
Probably, I think, comes down to living for others and not yourself.
Exactly. Service, yes.
That's very much a requirement because a lot of people join a community as a form of escape. Like they want to go outside of the society. They're not. They don't agree with the values that they're pushed on, and so they're like, okay, I need to get out of here somewhere into nature, and they'll have this fantasy in their head that it'll all be fantastic, and they'll go into some of these communities, but without this intention of service, and then you're like, at a certain while it can work, but all of these like a community starting or even better to say maintaining a community requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of, well, not effort is not the right but work is. It requires a lot of work. Like you need to be responsible for a lot of things that you would normally push away for. No, if I don't clean the trash here on the street, that's the government's task, and push that away. And then, if I'm sick, I'll go to the doctor. He's responsible for my health. No, all of these things you have to be responsible for, and so like service are not necessarily just for others, although that includes it, but also to yourself. Like if you don't are in the right state of health, you can live for others, but then eventually you fall short on yourself, because that's how I start my day, is meditating and tending to my own state. Oh man.
Jasper.
Yeah, I just got this out again.
Yes, I can hear you.
But
Okay.
Where I left off?
Service to self and others.
Yeah. So it includes others, but it's also a service to like your own state as well. So like that's why I think meditation is such an important key in the community as well, because if you don't tend to your own state, so you don't include service to creating stability or balance in yourself, then other people are constantly what Tjeerd was speaking on earlier, in this dependence. that's also a very interesting topic because, like, of course, everything is interdependent, but you should facilitate this self-reliance in a community as much as possible, so that you're not. That's what I was speaking on earlier as well. Like if you're not an electrician, and the person falls away for some reason, who got some of the skills that can replace this person? Like, yes, of course we need electricians, yes, we need surgeons, but if the surgeon isn't teaching, like, that's the most important role that anybody can have. It's great that you can be a surgeon, it's great that you can be a healer, it's great that you can garden, but if you're not able to teach those skills to other people, then people are becoming dependent on you, and if you fall away, who is there to fill the gaps? And if the person is in state of service, to tie it back to that, they know that this is a part of that. A part of giving service is being present, and reminding the other person to be present, but also to teach them what you know, like to share. It's not necessarily like teach is maybe not the right word. It's more like sharing your own gifts, your own qualities, your own skills that another person can benefit from, and it's always an exchange. Like you have to be receptive for both sides as well. But it all comes from the state of service. As a person is just there for themselves, then eventually the whole community will stagnate, and it will lack a vision, because like a vision is always changing. It's always like, okay, there's another person joining in the community. This changes the vision because they have something to bring in as well, which can enhance the community.
Exactly, yeah.
Growing.
What is the value of knowledge if it's not shared? You know, if you take all of your knowledge to the grave, then it was really for nothing. I think that speaks to what Netrista was saying about the value of having multiple generations living together, passing on their knowledge, passing on their worldview, and also having things go back and forth. Also having younger generations help the older ones adjust the living in the now, in the present. These things are very important, even if it's not related by blood. I know that a lot of intentional communities spring up around the idea of minded people raising their kids together. And so I think that might be what it comes down to, is like, okay, what about the kids?
The thing that I was Jasper had said really made me realize, at least in my own experience, what intentional community would look like specifically for me. It would come from the kind of values that we have in the Unitarian Universalist tradition. Are you too familiar with Unitarian Universalism?
Oh, please enlighten me.
Well, it's a religion. It goes back to, well, it was formed as a religion going back to the 1500s, in the primary conception that there is a God, a singular God. But what that morphed into in today's in today's reincarnation is less about religion at all. A lot of us are atheists, but it's the principles on which we all covenant with one another. And the primary one is that we respect the dignity, we respect and recognize the dignity in every other person that we interface with. And I think that love can be a stretch. You can't always love everybody, but you can always see the dignity and worth in other people. And there are 7 other principles, and one of them is to be a voice for people who don't have a voice. One's to realize we're all interconnected, so on and so forth. But they're all really good values to have, that at least I feel would make the world a better place to live in. And the other creed is that service is the creed, regardless of what you believe in or if you believe in anything else. The main thrust of your life should be service, with the understanding that love is the law. And you're performing service out of love. And that is it. And those are things that we can realistically obtain to without all the other overhead of having to have a specific religion, or we're all necessarily going to live off the grid, or we're all going to do this, or we're all going to do that. I think if you went into a community with those core values and you strongly brought up your children with those basic values, that you could really have an improvement on society, because that is what is lacking. Is the minute somebody disagrees with you, that other person's dignity, self-worth doesn't even exist to you, and that's where things start to fall apart. Yeah. And that's what I'd like to see. I've seen all kinds of things, but if you could see something where people literally lived and executed on other people having dignity and a value and a right to be here, I think things would vastly improve.
Do you think that has to include, because I think it might, does it have to include a belief in a higher power? It can be love. It doesn't have to be God, but like something that like ties us together.
Yes, because Unitarian Universalism does come out of, has a religious foundation to it. That's where it started. But in today's reincarnation, so many people don't have that orientation to a higher power, or a concrete higher power. Maybe they think there's something ineffable, or some spiritual
the field, or the source.
Or something like that. You will find that is, the Unitarian, some Unitarians sort of have that conception, but some have no conception of any sort of religion at all. But, for myself and a whole other contingent of atheists, we don't think that we need to have a higher power tell us we have to love other people.
So is Unitarianism, is that like units and one? Is it revolve around oneness as well?
It revolves around, in its originating state, it evolved around the idea that there was one God and Jesus was a prophet, something to that effect. And that was one interpretation of biblical scripture. There is a very strong respect for Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And then that's extended to Buddhism, whatever religion. We don't have any ill will towards any religion. Everybody is welcome. In my Unitarian church that I belong to, there's a big sign, all are welcome here. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. What matters is that ultimately the law that you live by is loving other people, and you orient your service to your belief system is your orientation to your belief system is one that you serve other people, and that you have these other principles, that you respect the dignity and self-worth of other people. And you don't need a God for that, but if you do, that's kind of the values you kind of want to take away from that belief system anyway, whatever it may be. And I do think most religions, or if not all religions, fundamentally do have that as a core principle. Mm-hmm. So I think everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely.
One for all and all for one.
Yes, but we get lost. You get, especially in America, insofar as I know, Catholics are Christians. But there's some sort of viewpoint that Catholics and Christians are two different things. And if you're a Lutheran and you're not a fundamentalist, they're two very fundamentalist religions, especially with the older Lutherans. But because there's a difference, somebody will think, I'm going to be saved, but you're not going to be saved because you're slightly different. Your same basic religion is mine. Because you don't follow my same pastor or whatever, you're not going to be saved.
You haven't been baptized.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Exactly, and that's where we're losing it. If we could just get away from, you got that pastor and your religion's called this and whatever, and just say, look, the core of all of the teachings which we hold dear is love, and that should, Jesus was all about service. So if everybody did that, then everybody would get along.
Oh, and I guess from what you're describing, when you have the one God and Jesus is a prophet, I think that that opens the possibility of having Gautama Buddha or Babaji also be a prophet of that same God of oneness.
Yes, and then
I think that really opens it up.
If you go away, if you gravitate away towards what was I gonna say? Like if you gravitate away towards like a very personal God, and you just believe in something like a source or whatever, all of this
Brahman.
conceptualization of the prophets are just like ascended masters or more enlightened people that understand how this world in which we live in could work for everybody's benefit and not just for a few people.
It seems like a radical suggestion then, but I guess so. I just mentioned earlier the love that would need to exist, and you mentioned like the cohesiveness, where you actually kind of recognize the pattern in all of our connections. It seems like it might also serve the goals of the community if you're able to see this God or this unity in everyone else and yourself. Kind of look for it.
Regardless of what you believe, whether or not you have a God or you're more like we're all made of stardust, which is more my thing, it's still the same basic idea. There really isn't much of a difference there when you really get down to it, unless you really need a really personal God. But in that particular manifestation, you're still getting the core values from the people who present as prophets for this God. I'm not aware of any religion where that's doesn't have at least some aspect of love embedded in it. Even if it's just for your own tribe, but in the very core, that is the central point.
Absolutely. Yep. That's what it comes down to. I think, yeah, when you get into that, that's of course like the suppressed elements of our religions as well, right? When polytheism got driven out and patriarchal society took over, kind of banishing all the females from the temples and worship, and all the goddess teachings became the mysteries, and that kind of leads into the revival that we might have to see from the feminine side, and the empowerment. It might actually be the missing ingredient to make this global community work.
Yes. I think it can work. I don't think that there is a lot of hope for the short term. I think the status quo is going to be what it is. But I think with the more and more greater exposure, like I'm having with yourself and with Jasper and so on, is more and more people have their norm interfacing with people all over the world and really becoming beholden to being open to other people's views. I think there's going to be an evolution in the thought process. It's just going to take time because we have older generations. This is like revolutionary. I can't really get on board with it. But my son's age, my son is very global and is experiencing everybody. So he's going to be less inclined to see the other as something necessarily bad, and will be more inclined to listen and dialogue with people in a manner that's productive. And I think his generation is going to be that generation that gets us further along.
Can see that for sure, and maybe intentional communities will play a big role in that. When you're saying like the status quo will remain the status quo for a long time, probably. Like the planet is a big place.
Yes.
If we want to kind of manifest some type of heaven on earth kind of experience where we're all getting along, then the best way to get that started is perhaps in intentional communities. Yes. And try and get it right first. Create a bubble of heaven, and try and build from there.
Well, yeah,
Exactly.
like how I see like these communities as being like the seed of the new world. So all of these places there will be like experimental grounds for communal lifestyles to flourish, and also a lot of creativity will come from there as well. And I think it's also like a basement for healers, like people that really want to live in service but just find it too draining to just do that in a big city. They have some place to retreat and come to people that understand how it is to be so much damaged yourself that you want to heal not just yourself but also others with that like transmutation, with that understanding of like the things. Like a healer is very much drawn by their own wounds. Like if you want to heal something, you have to be first be wounded. And in order to, if you know how it is to be wounded, you can provide healing for other people because you know like how it feels like. Basically, it's like a training for being an empath, and so it's so like if you're, I don't know how empathic you guys are, but for myself, I'm very much an empath for a large degree, and it's quite hard. It's like makes spirituality much like some people have this view of spirituality is all great and all fantastic, this new age like all positive way, but it's actually very difficult because you have to become more and more empathetic towards other human beings who are suffering. And for some people that can become too much. That's why there's a lot of suicide and people getting exposed to it and don't really know how to place it or how to process it. And so I think these communities are like places to go where people don't really judge beforehand. Like they don't have preconceptions about you. They just, like a lot of problems exist because people build an image of a person. They don't see the person directly. They see how they think they are. And that actually, they'll attack that, but they'll never address the person straight on because they're afraid of looking somebody straight in the eye. Things like eye gazing and stuff. These are also practices that are going on in communities. You can never force it, but if a person is open to it, like it's actually very like a battery recharging experience. Like just being in this society, for myself, in the Netherlands here, people are very materialistic. But our material reality is something, well yeah, if you go to philosophy, it has something vital, it has something alive. And that is not always honored. And so I don't see necessarily communities just being with other human beings. It's also like here with my cat and with animals and also with species that we can't see. So it's community is very much how it used to be, like in before Christian times, as well as some streams of Christianity. But I think it's a very natural way of living. Just like we as humans, we are intended to live in tribes. We actually enhance our quality of living if we know where we belong. This is like scientifically even being proven how even our lifestyle and like our diet and our movements, which are also important, but even like when we know where we belong, we can drink, we can eat very unhealthy food, but our heart rate will be lower than people that train and live a very healthy lifestyle. So the sense of belonging is so essential. And I think that's why like the intentional communities are so important. So maybe those are do you guys have some concluding words about like intentional communities that you wanted to share? And I also have a question for still to talk a bit about, because you skipped over I asked you a question about the movie. Maybe at the end you can explain a little bit about that project.
Oh, okay.
And yeah.
Well,
intentional communities as well.
I have experienced multiple intentional communities, like I've said. Some of them wouldn't appeal to me, but some of them have, and the ones that have are impressive. And I think that regardless of where you fit in on the spectrum, as long as it's something that is of interest to you, I feel that a community exists or could be founded that could bring so much balance to your life that it is a proposition that really should be seriously considered. I mean, in my personal worldview, I'm you only live once type of girl. So for me, having a fulfilling work and home life is something that I want to experience while I'm here. And I do think that at least in my conception, intentional community may be something I definitely want to gravitate towards. And if someone is religiously inclined and they don't have that pressing a need that they have to get all into this life, I feel that able to live amongst people that share your same worldview, your same level of spirituality, is all something that would greatly enrich your life. To have your people, right there with you as comforts and supports and recreational companions and so forth. I don't see any downsides to it as long as you're realistic about what can be achieved. I don't think it's going to be all rainbows and butterflies, but I do think that it is an avenue that seeking people should consider.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it's definitely something that you should consider because we all have to make so many choices in how we want to live our lives. And so many choices actually that we almost, I mean, will fall for it, that we all think that life is actually something serious. It's not supposed to be. In my personal philosophical opinion, life isn't serious. It's a game. As like we're here, Jasper, you're talking about materialism, right? And I have to be very honest. When you said that, I had a little internal laugh because I'm a very spiritually inclined person. Like I don't believe I'm a three-dimensional being. I'm probably like a fifth-dimensional being that came here to have a three-dimensional experience. So it makes no sense to me to then be like, ugh, all this material stuff, I don't want it. It's like, no, that's what I came here for. Like, I want a jet ski, and I love my BMW SUV. I'm here to have the full experience, and I think I've been here enough times to not get attached to those things, and and a lot of times when I think about an intentional community, I think, oh, you have to give all of those things up. And that's not necessarily the case because intentional communities are also evolved. They're getting very big too. Like you can have an intentional community that's built around a golf course, and I'm telling you, they exist. And you don't have to all share some latrine that you dug a hole off of and put a little wooden shed around. No, no, no. We have to kind of maybe change our opinion on what an intentional community can look like, and they can be glamorous too. They can be luxurious too, because otherwise I'd never get my wife to visit one. So these kinds of things, like intentional communities, they should be for everyone, and they don't have to be some hippie commune where everybody is walking around with no shirt on or is having like 15 boyfriends. That's nonsense. Like we can find out for ourselves by kind of discovering the community that we are already a part of, and then trying to see like, okay, how can we make them more holistic? So I thought it was a very stimulating conversation.
Yes.
And to hear about your experiences, Netrista, because for me, I've been looking at it from the outside, and then realizing that I'm actually in a very big one myself, and in smaller ones too. And so, I think that it's a thought exercise to see like, hey, what kind of communities am I already a part of, and if I could actually control shaping one, what would that one look like?
Yeah, that's like one point you mentioned about like we're always in a form of community. That's a key point because people think, do I have to move somewhere else to be in a community? But that's what we're using with the intentional community, but we're not aware, or at least some people are not aware that we're already living in some sort of community already.
Yeah, we're just ignoring the other members.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and then the last question about like the movie Snow Babies that we worked on together. Could you?
Oh, that's the working title. I don't like that anymore. That was the working title for that, to orient myself around a motif. Yes, we were working together on a script. It's undergoing revisions now. As I'd stated, my huge avocation was writing a film script. So I am formally trained in this particular endeavor, and I trend more towards the sacred drama genre. So one of the things that another thing that I'm very passionate about being a adopted person is the marginalization of the voices of people who are adopted. And this is very big in American culture. And I'm part of multiple adoptee activist groups. And what I had wanted to do is, so many of us in the community are doing, is we are coming together and we are telling our stories in all different ways to paint an accurate picture of what adoption actually means for the individual who is adopted. And the script, I mean, ideally it'd be great if it was a movie, but the script itself was actually written for the purpose of being illustrated as a graphic novel. It's just that I gravitate more towards that particular medium because I am trained in that medium. So that's likely what's going to happen with it as soon as it is completed.
Any expectations when that will be?
I'm hoping imminently. I mean, I do have to undergo revisions, which I'm doing right now, to make it a little more natural in its flow, pursue some avenues of investigation in the script thematically that could be pulled out a little bit more. And Jasper, I mentioned that to you, with birch trees and all that stuff. But that is something I'm pretty much heads down on it. I'm actually going to be working on it later today. So it will be done within a year, and then I have to follow up with the graphics artist in regards to whether or not he still wants to pursue this. But that was how it was conceptualized.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on the Common Underground podcast episode. Yeah, you have any closing words? Anything you want to leave behind for the viewers or for us, for all humanity?
For Tjeerd, right?
Just for me.
Just making sure.
It's all good.
Oh goodness.
It's all on you, Tjeerd.
I would like to thank you, Netrista. This is the second time, I guess, that we've been able to have a conversation. I can say I really respect your opinions and the way you talk about things. It's a learning experience for me once again, and I got into this podcast very, very unprepared. Like at least I guess maybe a little bit more prepared than I thought I was because of my personal life experience. But I've definitely learned a lot, and I will probably continue to learn about this subject now because my interest has been awoken.
Perfect. That's great to hear, and I love speaking with you and Jasper as well. It's always a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, then to the viewers, welcome. Thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe. There will be a philosophy circle next month. So in a few days or a few weeks, I have not decided on the date yet, but it will be somewhere next month. So if people want to join, as people can see, it's now recording on Discord. It's something that we're going to use a lot more in the future. So it's open to anybody, and you can interact with us. We'll be, at least for me, I will be here somewhere in the evening, in the weekends. At least they're in Amsterdam time zone. So it might be that I'm there or other people are there. So you get that sense of community, not just on a on a local basis that we're talking about, but also like on the digital way as well. So for people that want to enter into the talks and talk with us about these things or about other topics, they are welcome to join. So I will leave it at that. So thank you again, both of you, for coming, and eternal love.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jasper.